I'm Jennifer Perkins. I'm managing attorney of volunteer services and community engagement at the Legal Aid Society. I'm joined here today by Rachel Wheat Jackson. She's a former legal aid client, and Felix Sharp. He's a volunteer attorney who volunteers his time with legal aid. So in our first panel, we heard about Kentucky's leadership in second chance employment and some of the policy changes that have helped move this work forward. I personally have had the privilege of working in the area of expungement for the last decade. I started my work at Legal Aid Society as an expungement fellow, doing expungement work day in and day out every day. Back then, the law was very limited, and it was very difficult to expunge any offenses. You had to meet very strict criteria, very few people qualified, the rules were very complicated, and even when someone had done everything right, even when they had been in recovery for a decade or more, often those doors were closed. Expungement was not an option. Today, many more Kentuckians have the opportunity to clear their eligible records, but that's really just the beginning of the story. So the focus of this panel is going to be on the expungement experience and those doors that open after someone is able to expunge their record, and how our volunteers and community partners play a role in that. So I want to start with you, Rachel. You've lived this journey. And could you tell us a little bit about what this experience has been like for you personally, your expungement experience? We'd love to hear about it.
Okay, so my expungement fair was right in the middle of COVID. So it was 2021. It was virtual. I was so excited. I think I'd waited 10 years at that point after all of my journey, waiting the time after you're off supervision, because of course I was on probation for a period of time. And so the way that the process worked was it wasn't live like it is now, where you see the attorney that day and they have your background and they're able to tell you, you did this online forum and then you were like checked off a list and you were told to call in to intake. And so when I called in, unfortunately, we had an unruly dog, and my neighbors had complained about my dog. And so I had to go to court for a civil complaint. Well, however that looks on the Kentucky court.gov, whatever, it looked like I had an open case. And so as sweet as she could on the other end of the phone said, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to wait another year because you have an active case. And I was like, an active case? So there was something said in the previous panel about, the hope that the attorney gives and how he mentioned how we're oftentimes our own worst enemy because we give up on ourselves. And so there were a series of hurdles in that being just the first one. There was a box not checked after our first court appearance. But once I waited that year, once I got with my attorney who, took the best care of me in my case. And I often say that if I wouldn't have had to wait that year, I don't know if I would have gotten her. And so, sometimes the stars align the way they are just supposed to, but we don't know that at the time. And so I got the perfect attorney that went to battle for me and gave me the hope that despite whatever we got, maybe it's not a permanent no, it's just a not right now. And so that was a little bit of my experience with just the discouragement sometimes that even though you're eligible, is it really going to happen? Is it really going to be? Am I really going to be expunged?
And can you talk a little bit about what that looked like, the actual expungement, process, the court experience, all of that?
Absolutely. So we had waited the year. I circled back and I did the intake again and then was told, yes, it's a go, was contacted by a legal advocate and then was told I would meet my attorney and we would go forward with the paperwork. And then I got like my first, hope shot in that. I was under the impression that because of some of my previous charges, I only had one expungible offense based on everything that I had read. And of course, you go down the rabbit holes and the lists of, what are. And so I thought, well, if I'm not, then I can seek a pardon, I can do what I need to do. But she explained to me that she could ask the current Commonwealth attorney to review my past case, see if we could amend anything down to expungible offenses. And she was determined to make sure that I was going to have a clean record. So we go to court, and a business partner of mine at the time sat beside me that day, and I was so excited, but it wasn't a judge that had ever seen me. It wasn't a prosecutor that I'd ever worked with. And so it was kind of like strangers. And again, just a little bit nerve-wracking, because I thought, it's not people that know, which I wanted that. I didn't want any preferential treatment because of maybe the committees I sit on now, or the house that I run, or the work that I do. And so because I wanted to be able to tell people that this works regardless who you are. But the judge, I got the impression that it was kind of like, oh, well, there was never what would this mean for you? There was never and unfortunately, a few weeks later, I got a packet in the mail, and I thought, well, it was just a formality, and it was going to be, my approval, and, I was going to open it up, and like fireworks were going to go off, and it was a denial that there was something not checked or not done. And I immediately screenshotted my attorney. I sent a frustrated text to my business partner, and he said, I don't know if those judges realize that with a 5-second flick of their pen, the impact that they have on our lives. We are both several degrees later, several years off of probation, several hard work behind us you said it earlier, to kind of get free from that, not let us hold it back. And so to have that denial first off was...
And so procedural like that, right?
Yeah.
Just to check in or not check in a box.
That's it.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to expunge your record in the first place? What led you to seek the expungement?
So I think I've been really lucky. I feel like I've been really lucky. When I was in treatment 15 years ago, I came from a background in banquet and event planning, hotel restaurant management, that type of thing. And I knew that wasn't going to be an environment that was going to be conducive to a recovering lifestyle. And so I, as most of us do, jumped feet first into human services. And so I have been able, from that point going forward, to utilize what may be liabilities as assets in job interviews and in that particular career path, because I had the lived experience to excel in helping my clients and the community. And so it hadn't held me back in that sense. Now, it created extra work for every, school application, for every sometimes job application, scholarship, grant, licenses. I always had to appeal to a board or write a paper or do some extra work to get to explain where I was and why who this is on this paper isn't me anymore. But with my older two children, they were in private school, and it was as simple as meeting with the board of directors for that school to allow me to be involved in their field trips and as the class mom, and do the things that I want to do because I want to be an involved mom now. But when they transitioned to public school, and now I have two younger children, I knew that without a record expungement, I wouldn't be able to be present in their lives in that way.
Because of that background screening.
Because of the background screening, I couldn't volunteer on the t-ball field. I couldn't, go to Kentucky Down Under or
class parties.
That's it.
All the things.
And then how would I explain that to them? And so that was one of the biggest motivations. Now, you don't realize that when, that you're just kind of seeing that, you don't see the forest for the trees. But of course, then when I applied for my CSW and I screenshotted the computer screen and sent it to my attorney and said, do I really get to say no? Like, do I, when it said
regard to having a
do
criminal
you have a criminal
record?
record? And I like felt like I was holding my breath, like I was going to say no, and then somebody was going to be like, "That's not true,"
Yep. And
Then-
Kentucky law, specifically says you're not required to
Yeah.
disclose it any longer on
Yeah.
applications, for
the
employment.
first time
or
I
otherwise.
got you get a copy when somebody requests your background, and the first time I got it back, and I said, well, it really just looks like I don't know how to stop at stop signs. Like, what do you know? So
Love it. Rachel, your story is really powerful, and thank you so much for sharing with us. I think that's something people don't think about a lot, like volunteering at your kid's school, being your kid's basketball coach, all these ways that you want to, be involved in your child's life, and you would be barred from doing that just because of your past. And so I think that's really important to share that aspect of it too, in addition to the employment and education and everything else. It's a huge barrier for people, and to be able to leave that in the past and move forward in your life, I know is meaningful. So thank you for sharing that with us. Felix, I want to turn to you now. I know you've sat with people at expungement clinics many times. You've heard stories like Rachel. Does this sound familiar to you as you're hearing her story? And I wanted to know if there were stories that you think of from your experiences volunteering, anything that comes to mind, some of these sort of, same sort of experiences our clients have.
Well, Rachel, thank you for your story. And in some respects, it's familiar. In some respects, not, because we're often there right at the beginning step, but we don't get to see when you actually get to go volunteer with the kids' school and have that participation that you want to. But to answer your other question, Jen, yeah, it's oftentimes where people just want to be contributing members of society, and it's something from 15 years ago that has no bearing on who they are today that you're helping out with. So it's really humbling to hear the impact of some of this work that legal aid does, because like I said before, we're often there in the beginning. So I'm just smiling from ear to ear because we don't get to hear some of those stories sometimes.
You hear those desires and the things people are hoping to do, but then to hear it kind of full circle like that is powerful. And Felix, I want to reflect for a moment on the process, on this, years-long process. It's lengthy, like Rachel described, so it takes forever. I mean, told you got to wait another year. It's so hard. As an attorney, I'm sure that this, doesn't surprise you. Our legal system's complicated. It can be daunting for someone who's not used to navigating it. And that's where you come in as a volunteer attorney, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey as a volunteer attorney, what got you into this, and what's made you continue volunteering your time with Legal Aid Society.
Well, my journey started when I was a first-year associate at my law firm. Now, Judge Josephine Buckner, I think she was working at Legal Aid at the time, and stopped by our office and offered to do a training. And I said, yeah, I want to go. And ever since that training, Brenda Bacon is the paralegal who sends out files on Fridays, and you have cases on today, Monday, in 700 West Jefferson. But if I had a Monday morning open, I would get the file on Friday and show up on Monday. But I started doing it because I had volunteered, but then I kept doing it because it makes you a better lawyer. It makes you a better lawyer getting those opportunities to stand up and represent your client and stand between your client in the court. And these were domestic violence order cases, but to stand between your client in the court, to stand between your client and an alleged abuser. I mean, it really sharpens your resolve and your sword, so to speak. So that's why I continued to do it, because and then obviously, so those are the selfish reasons, but altruistically, you would get that hug, that pat on the back from either your client or their father or child who came with them to court that day, and you kind of held their hand through the process. So to be honest with you, it's rewarding all around. And since then, since I've gone in-house, participating in expungement clinics and hearing at least similar stories to Rachel's, and being able to have an impact there also.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Felix, and we appreciate you so much and the time you donate to help our clients. It is impactful. The difference between going through this experience on your own versus having an attorney there to guide you through the court processes, to explain, what it means. It's huge. It makes all the difference. Rachel, you shared earlier about, that experience standing in front of the judge, being told you had to wait another year after having already waited so long to expunge your record. What would you want people who work in the legal system to understand about moments like that?
I think that it's confusing for us. I had navigated a lot of my own legal stuff at one point, just to avoid high private attorney fees.
Sure.
And I got really fortunate with the connections I made with some of our court clerks. And they would help me as much as maybe by pointing or as much as they could. But when it does get hairy, and it's legal jargon that we may not understand, that I think about a lot of times now as a therapist, if I'm walking through sensitive seasons with clients, and oftentimes their frustration would seem to be directed at me, and it's not at all. And I'm certain, golly, I said, you make me want to go be an attorney, like to hear you and your work. Like, I can't imagine those moments where you all are holding your breath, of like, oh gosh, how are they going to react maybe to this? What if she didn't get the DVO or the EPO, or what if, all of the things. And so, yeah, just that our frustration in those points or just reciprocal damage, and a lot of times it's because we carry guilt and shame. And there's that part too.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And Felix, hearing Rachel describe her experience, what strikes you as someone who stood beside clients in the courtroom, about that impact of your role as the attorney?
I think that when you're practicing law, when you're a young associate, you can somewhat be self-centered. I've got these billable hour requirements that I've got to meet. I've got deadlines. I got to respond to these partners. But stories like Rachel's really put things into perspective. I also think that you can feel like you don't have you don't know anything, or you don't have the power to help somebody. But stories like Rachel's tell you that you do, even just being that shield between the court system and your client, just having that I'm going to stand up and say my name and take the questions and all of that, and be the go-between. Understanding that actually has an impact is again, I think, just humbling to hear. Yeah.
Listening to your stories, part of what's striking to me is that it's no one person, it's no one organization that makes these stories possible, right? It's a collaboration, it's a partnership. For you, Rachel, there was Goodwill, right, with the expungement clinic. There was legal aid, and the services that they provided you. There's your kids' school and your desire to be involved there in your community. And then for you, Felix, there's, Judge Buckner and the training, that when she was formed, at the time, a legal aid attorney, going out in the community, sharing the word, sharing the work we're doing. There's your employer now who promotes the pro bono service that you're able to do, your volunteer work. And then there's you and other volunteer attorneys volunteering your time. And so it really takes, all of these partners working together, right, to move forward. So what I'd like to hear from each of you all about why those partnerships matter, and like what happens, when we aren't working in collaboration like that. And I'd start with you, Rachel. How do you think this, collaboration in your community has played a role in moving forward?
Well, it's been said a couple of times this morning, that it truly does take a village, and it does. I think I wasn't aware of the preparation and the time and fiscal efforts that it takes to put on the expungement fairs and those types of things. And so you think if there weren't those pieces and everybody wasn't willing, if you all weren't willing to meet here today and, participate in multidisciplinary conversations to understand how this truly affects people. My son's with me today. And so when you think about the trickle effect of like, this didn't just affect me in a positive manner. It affects 4 other kids. It affects my parents positively. If it affects my whole community, I'm able to help other women go through the same thing and get through it. And then it continues. And then we in turn build stronger community partners because then we're able to then link with people and provide those services and help. And so, you're only as strong as your weakest link sometimes. And so if everybody is not as excited about the effort and willing to take your all's time as professionals, then man, there'd be a whole lot of people out here that aren't able to pursue things that, you said you deserve to be able to do that and to pursue. And so.
Felix, do you have any thoughts on the role of these partnerships, the community collaboration?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's the quote? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'm lucky to have had employers that really see the value and in providing time to do this work, and they benefit also. They benefit also because our skills are being sharpened in the process. So it's again, I guess the theme of my position here is that it's mutually beneficial. It's mutually beneficial to volunteer in this capacity.
We've covered a lot. We've talked about the doors that open in the wake of record clearing. We've talked about the work and partnerships that are necessary to open those doors. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to just share some final thoughts. If someone leaves this room today remembering one thing about second chances and with regard to expungement, what do you hope it is? Felix, I'll start with you this time.
I mean, I could just see myself being on a field trip with Rachel, and we probably wouldn't be dressed like we are today. We just have on jeans and a t-shirt. And I think that from just hearing your story, Rachel, is we're just helping people again, just trying to do things that we take for granted, and just recognizing and taking the time to recognize that.
I told you earlier that, yes, Sunday, I was taking off my volunteer tag because I get to teach Sunday school now. And the particular church that we go to for the safety of our kids does a background check. And I had that thought of fixing to throw that tag in the trash. And I thought, man, what an opportunity that I get to have my kids help me, to positively impact kids in that classroom, to have fun. And if I hadn't had the opportunity to have expungement, then I wouldn't have that sticker.
Rachel, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you both. We appreciate your time. Thank you.